We were always told not to go into the forest, not because of dangerous animals or fear of getting lost, but because that is where the old ones and their machines lay. I was always a curious child, however, even more than usual for a little young girl. The trees with their rich brown trunks and swaying green needles seemed to beckon to me with their swaying branches. Dreams and fantasies about finding one of the old ones, still alive, that I could bring home to my village. The elders spoke about tales of machines the size of great cities, passed down to them by their elders. With each story, all I could wonder was how prosperous our village would be with the knowledge of the old ones. For as long as I can remember, that question plagued my young mind. I remember my first excursion into the forest as though I had just returned from it. A plague had decimated the village's crops, leaving many homes, including mine, without food for the winter. I could feel the first nip of winter's cold as I awoke that wondrous morning. I did not have breakfast on my way out of my family's small mud brick home. There was nothing to eat. Instead, I grabbed a water skin from behind the woodpile where I had stashed it earlier, before clambering over the fence and sprinting towards the tree line before anyone could spot me. Heart thrumming, legs pumping, I ran deep into the woods, spurred on by the hope that maybe something of the old ones had survived, something that could help us. But as the forest grew deeper and darker the farther from the village I got, I began to feel afraid. The elders' stories about towering machines were far from a comfort now as I glanced through the trees at any slight noise in the darkness. My fear spurred me forward, making me run deeper into the forest until I was well and truly lost. Collapsing against what I thought was a square stone jutting from the ground, I began to cry. I knew going into the forest was foolish. Everyone knew that, but I had to try and be brave, try and save the village on my own. But now I was lost, and the thought of never seeing my parents again shattered what little hope I had left. "Who are you?" The voice made me jump from my skin and press my back against the rock for protection as I frantically looked for the source. "Behind you." The voice spoke again, and I leapt away from the oddly smooth rectangular rock. Staring at it, I noticed that there was a small horizontal slit with a hole above it in the rock's face that wasn't there before. Shock turned to fear, then jubilation, then back to down terror as I bowed before the strange device. "My name is Mejkala, Great Machine. I did not mean to disturb your sacred slumber. Please have mercy." There was a poignant silence after I spoke, a feeling like being watched from every angle washing over me. It felt like hours, but must have only been a few minutes before the machine spoke again. "Rise, child. What is it that you need?" Sitting upright fast enough to almost knock myself backward, I begged. "My village. A plague is killing our crops. We won't have enough food for winter. Please, we won't survive without your help." Another poignant silence. "How many souls are there?" The gentleness in the machine's voice surprised me, giving me a moment to think before replying. I don't know. It could be more than 1,000 if the other villages have also been struck. It's a large favor to ask." I was cut off by a loud hissing noise, jumping back as the ground beneath my knees began to yawn open with a metallic squeal. A massive circular metal platform slowly rising into view with two large, tube-shaped bags set neatly upon it. 2 battalion-sized emergency ration packs issued. Follow the photographic instructions on the canister to prepare. Do not expose canister to an open flame. Unable to believe my eyes, I dove for one of the bags, snatching it away before the machine could take it back, surprised at the light weight of the bag. Gingerly taking the other one, I remembered I was lost. The machine seemed to have noticed my distress, asking bluntly, "Are you lost?" I could only nod as I held back tears. There was something hard and sharp in my throat, blocking my words as I stared off into the boundless forest. A soft hum filled the air. A blue light bathed the nearby foliage. Wonderment made me turn around in spite of my fear. Displayed inside of a dense mist that seemed to emanate from the platform itself was a 3-dimensional map of the forest laid bare before my eyes. "Scout craft, detect a congregation of heat signatures 2 hours due south. Population estimated to be at previously mentioned levels. A large blue arrow appeared in place of the map, pointing to my left. Hurry home. Your parents will worry. How? Will I find you again? I blurted before covering my mouth as that poignant silence filled the forest. Call my name and I shall answer. The voice was almost stern in its coldness. If I had been any less curious, or any more fearful, I never would have asked my next question. What's your name? Designation, MAL, LARD, P-75, Mobile Autonomous Landship, Long-Range Artillery, Reconnaissance and Defense, Platform 75. I looked at the strange, smooth rock curiously, unsure how I would remember such a long name. What did the old ones call you? The machine's pause was not like the ones before. It was longer, almost reclusive. I could almost sense a kind of sadness in the pause, like when a bead breaks off your necklace and you only notice after the fact. They called me Mr. Ducky, after a type of wetland bird from their home planet. Mr. Ducky, I whispered gently before looking back in the direction of my village. I'll be back, I promise, Mr. Ducky. I shall remain here. Hefting the surprisingly light bags, I began running home, hoping against hope that these two, admittedly small bags could feed the village through the winter. Mother was crying when I returned. Home, my father's face twisting in anger, then terror from where he consoled my mother as he spotted the strange green-colored bags I carried. I had to spend the rest of the day convincing them to at least try the food of the old ones, despite my own skepticism. Eventually, my father relented and retrieved a few pails of water, dumping them into a tin tub before gingerly setting one of the fist-sized canisters into the water and jumping back like it might explode. To his credit, the canister almost immediately began to violently hiss, boiling the water and producing a thick cloud of steam that had the three of us cowering behind the fireplace. Then, with a loud whoomph, a pillar of yellow, steaming hot, sponge-like bread grew from the tub of water and launched the now split-open canister onto the ground a few inches from the tub, a rich, sweet, citrus-like scent filling our small hut as we stared in awe. I was the first to impulsively grab a fistful of the spongy material and shove it in my mouth, almost unable to swallow in surprise at how delicious it was. Tasting similarly to the sour yellow fruits we harvested from the river basin, but so much sweeter and softer, reminiscent of a New Year's cake. The glee with which my father helped me carry the remaining canisters and tub of sponge cake was a happiness I had solemnly seen from the stoic farmer. He even had his throat puffed out, revealing a deep blue hue. When the elders first laid eyes on the canisters, they could scarcely believe their eyes, huddling around them like school children as they each tried to decipher the old one's language stenciled on the side of each canister. I even saw a few dipping their hands into the tub of sponge cake, sampling it with awe in their eyes. As they did so, they begged me to regale them with my story about meeting Mr. Ducky. Perhaps that is why I remember it so well, I must have told the story a dozen times by the end of the day. Something I remember just as well is the feast we made from the old one's canister food. Simply by submerging the canisters in water, we were treated to meat and vegetables we had never before laid eyes upon, but were wholesome nonetheless. A food I particularly remember from that night was a legume paste that the elders had deciphered as mashed potatoes. While bland on its own, with a few pinches of salt and some soured cream, it was divine. To, I think all of our surprise, the canisters lasted through winter with food to spare. Our hunters took to using the strong metal of the canisters to make spear tips and arrowheads that were much lighter and sharper than the flint ones they had previously used. By the time spring poked its head out from beneath the covers, an ugly problem reared its head once again. The plague on our crops had not been cleansed by the winter chill. The first of our squash grew stunted and withered, rotting from the inside like they had the summer before. The elders beseeched me to take our infected crops to Mr. Ducky in the hopes the old ones had a cure for the disease. Approaching the forest's edge, I couldn't help but fear that Mr. Ducky wouldn't respond. But with the whole village watching, I called out his name at the top of my lungs. Immediately, a small trail of blue lights appeared, leading deeper into the forest. Heart pounding with excitement and necessity, I sprinted along the trail laid by the lights, dodging gnarled tree roots and odd stone formations until I reached that same oddly smooth gray rock. "What is it you need, child?" I heard him ask as I gently laid a sample of each of our infected crops on the ground before the stone and stepped away. The plague infecting our crops, it's back, and we hoped the old ones might know how to help. With a hiss, the crops sank into the earth, replaced by a smooth metal plate. I heard a soft whir and rumble from beneath my feet before Mr. Ducky spoke again. "The infection is a simple blight. Burn your fields with the crops still planted, then till the ashes into the earth. Cover your fields with mulch before planting to prevent the blight from reoccurring." My heart fluttered with relief as I bowed. "To the stone. How can we ever repay you?" One word was all Mr. Ducky stated in response. Prosper. Such a simple word, spoken by a machine no less. I would not recognize its significance until much later in life. Returning home and relaying Mr. Ducky's instructions, the entire village set to work burning the fields to ash, then re-tilling them. Me and the other children helped spread the mulch by running around and throwing fistfuls at each other while snorting with laughter. But by the end of the week, we had sowed new seeds, and we just had to wait. Our waiting was rewarded tenfold. Squash so large they collapsed under their own weight. Bushels of grain so numerous my father was sending runners out to other villages asking for help with the harvest. And the berries. I had never had berries so tender and sweet before, bursting on my tongue with the slightest pressure. We were all given time off from school to help our mothers harvest every last berry from the bushes. I was praised, of course, for making contact with the old ones and bringing about an age of prosperity, but the credit didn't belong to me. Every time someone thanked me in a hushed voice, I could only glance at the tree line. Truth be told, I felt bad for Mr. Ducky, alone in the woods at night. Wouldn't he be scared? I hadn't seen it before, but I don't think he could move. What if some mean wild animal knocked over the smooth rock we talked through? Those thoughts were what drove my nightly ventures into the woods, finding out that if I even whispered his name, Mr. Ducky would show me the path. I have no need for shelter. He had bristled as I set up the simple canopy I had brought with me to shelter the smooth rock from the rain. Wouldn't it be nice to be out of the rain for a little while? I knew I had him thinking when he paused for several minutes, allowing me to finish the canopy. Yes. I giggled softly and adjusted the canopy so it wouldn't get blown away before sitting cross-legged in front of the smooth rock. "What were your people like, Mr. Ducky?" I questioned curiously, expecting a long pause. "Brave. They were brave." The words came so quickly, I thought I had misheard for a moment. Looking at the circular hole in the stone, I gently asked, "What happened to them? Where'd they all go?" This time, there was a long, long pause. "They fought a great enemy, so you wouldn't have to." Sadness bled into the otherwise monotone voice of Mr. Ducky. "You seem to care for them a lot." As they cared for me. The melancholy in his voice stuck with me like a ragged cough on my walk back home, making me pick solemnly at my food until I asked my father the burning question. "Papa, what were the old ones like? Why am I the only one allowed in the forest?" A troubled, thoughtful look came over his face as he set down his spoon and folded his gnarled hands. Our ancestors spoke of how they could will the very air to shred their enemies in gouts of fire and sharp metal, machines that could crush a village underfoot if they were careless, tales of metal obelisks that roared like gods and spit retribution just as divine. They told us not to tread into the woods lest we provoke their wrath. He paused, licking his lips and taking a drink of water. "But they're just fairy tales, traditions after all. You described Mr. Ducky as just a strange, smooth stone, right?" I nodded slowly, poking at my food unsatisfied with that answer. Months passed and I found myself spending more and more time in the forest with Mr. Ducky, simply telling him about the happenings in the village and extracting every tidbit of information about the old ones that I could. His simple voice drew me in with the very stories the old ones had told their children, according to Mr. Ducky. Those months quickly turned to years, and before long I was a young woman. That was when Mr. Ducky asked me his first question. "Do your people prosper?" I looked up from the berry basket I was weaving with a nod. The village has grown. We have more time for leisure since we figured out irrigation. With your help, of course. We even have a blacksmith now. Why do you ask? I wish to leave a legacy worth leaving. I glanced at the little circular port curiously. Come on, Mr. Ducky. You haven't aged a day since we first met. The little black stared at me, the pause growing uncomfortably long. I fear there will come a day that I must rise from my resting place. Time has wrought damages upon me you are both too small and short-lived to see. Should that time come, I shall not be able to stand long. A soft nod was all I could offer in response, thoughtfully finishing the berry basket and setting it on top of the smooth rock. This is for you, in case you feel like collecting any berries. Mr. Ducky didn't respond as I packed up my remaining materials and began the trek home. His words stuck with me again like they had all those years ago. What was out there? Who would try and hurt us? We hadn't done anything to anyone. I got those answers all too soon. The entire village was woken up by shouting in the town square, jumbling past the crowd to get a glimpse at the commotion. I laid eyes on a terrifying sight. Shrod, one of the many runners between villages, had collapsed beside the town well. Large portions of his scales had been burnt off in an unnatural way. Through his pain, he was shouting frantically, purple demons, over and over again, until with a ragged gasp, he went limp. The entire village attended the council meeting that night, whispers of fear mixing with those of doubt to create a heady mixture of paranoia. And as always, right in the middle of it all was me. Take young Hrod's body into the forest, speak with Mr. Ducky, find out who did this, find out what we can do to stop them. Grelda's voice shook with grief. Hrod was her grandson and a good young man on top of that. To die in such a horrific way. I could only imagine how hard it was for her to hold herself together. Taking the sled's handles, I solemnly, dutifully hauled Hrod's body to the forest. I didn't even need to whisper his name as the blue path to the strange rock lit up. This had once been a place of joy, but now I only felt dread as I approached the smooth stone beneath its canopy. Resting the sled on the platform, I stepped, away before kneeling at its edge. Who could have done this? My voice cracked as I asked the question. An enemy you were never supposed to see. A broken laugh slipped from my throat. What are we going to do? How can we even fight back? There was a cacophonic bang from beneath my feet that made me yelp in surprise, the sound echoing through the forest. The very earth seemed to tremble beneath my knees, a steady hum slowly growing louder and deeper until it all but faded away. Somewhere far in the distance, I heard the crackling of falling trees. Go home, Mejkala, and tell your people not to. Look out their doors tonight. If the enemy wishes to proceed, they will do so through the forest. I looked up both fearfully and confusedly. But it's easier to get here from the south road. They will travel through the forest if they wish to proceed. Go now and take these. They will ensure your slumber remains undisturbed. A slot on the stone hinged open, revealing a brick of pink-colored pills with pictographic instructions to only take one. Nodding slowly, I took the pills and trudged back to the village. I had no option but to trust Mr. Ducky. He had never let us down before. Why would he now? We held another feast that night using the rest of the canistered food from all those years ago. A bit of brightness in the dark and dour pall hanging over our heads. For dessert, we had that delicious sponge cake before taking our pills and heading to bed more tired than ever. I woke up to utter chaos around the house. Anything not nailed or tied down had fallen to the floor. Wandering through the mess, I couldn't help but feel that something was considerably different today. Sun streamed in through the kitchen window that normally faced the for where was the forest. Running out the back door, I could only see a crater, as deep as a mountain was tall in the spot the forest had been. Slowly turning around, I saw the softly waving treetops on the opposite side of town. My pace was slow in my stupefied state, following the dirt path from the village center the way to the forest's edge. The other villagers slowly grouped around me, staring like I was at the neat pathway covered in small stones that stretched through the forest. We all flinched as what sounded like distant thunder broke through the trees. Alongside an odd, faint, crackling, popping sound, I very suddenly realized a great many things about the mysterious Mr. Ducky. Stepping forward, I called his name. Mr. Ducky? I almost wept with joy as his monotone voice breathed back through the trees. Mallard, P-75, Mr. Ducky, standing guard, all systems functioning normally. I could almost cry with joy as I called out, I thought time had crippled you, old man. If a machine could laugh, I'm sure Mr. Ducky would have in that moment. But he never did, allowing us to return to life almost as usual. We had avoided destruction, blight, and starvation, all thanks to Mr. Ducky. Now, dozens of years later, not even the youngest of children fear the forests like I once had. Freely frolicking amongst the trees, knowing that if they were to ever run into trouble or lose their way, they can simply call out to my friend, Mr. Ducky, and know they'll make it home safe and sound. If you want, you can support on my YouTube channel and listen to more stories. Sci-Fi Time, Sci-Fi Short Stories. Humans have this strange beverage, Trosk said, watching the human soldiers as they stirred something in steaming cups. I think they call it coffee. The rest of his squad stood around, half interested. Their eyes were on the battlefield ahead, a massive crater-filled wasteland under constant artillery fire. Humans had been sitting with them in the trenches for hours, seemingly calm, sipping their drinks while everyone else was on edge. Why do they drink it before every major fight? Grumbled Threx, adjusting the glowing straps of his armor. I don't understand them. I think it makes them invincible, Trosk muttered, leaning in closer. I've seen it. They drink that stuff and suddenly they go berserk in battle like they feel no pain. One of the humans overheard, a tall one with dirt on his face. He grinned as he downed the last of his cup. We don't feel pain. It's because we've got something extra in the tank. He winked. You should try it. Trosk looked down at the muddy substance the human called coffee. The last thing he wanted was to ingest some bizarre human concoction, but curiosity was a powerful motivator. After all, they were about to charge into a suicide mission. The Calirian forces, their shared enemy, were brutal mechanical beings. No mercy, no hesitation. They didn't leave survivors. Suit up, the human sergeant commanded, and everyone snapped into action. Blades were strapped on, pulse rifles checked. Trosk could feel his nerves creeping in as the sounds of distant explosions and crackling. Energy weapons filled the air. The plan was simple. Charge across the blasted no-man's land, punch a hole in the Calirian defenses, and disable their shield generator. Simple but suicidal. I can't believe we're doing this, Threx muttered as the trench doors started to creak open. We have to, Trosk said, his voice tight. Otherwise, none of us are leaving this planet alive. The humans lined, up beside them, finishing their drinks. One of them, a giant named Davis, tossed his cup aside and cracked his neck. Let's give these metal bastards a good show. The doors burst open with a grinding groan, and the battlefield opened before them, a chaos of smoke, explosions, and screeching energy beams. The Calirians had entrenched themselves, their glowing red eyes visible even from the trench. Their weapons kept firing, their cold, emotionless forms moving like clockwork. Move! The human sergeant shouted. Trosk's legs moved before his brain caught up. His pulse rifle clutched tightly in his hands. He sprinted into the hellish wasteland. Humans were already ahead of him, charging forward like they didn't even notice the danger. Davis was leading the pack, a wild grin on his face as he leapt over debris, dodging fire like it was second nature. Behind him, other humans followed, shouting commands and jokes like they were on a casual stroll, not running into certain death. Trosk's squad followed close behind, less enthusiastic but equally determined. The first wave of Calirian fire came down like a storm, ripping through the dirt, sending bodies flying. Trosk dove behind a chunk of metal as an explosion rocked the ground. He peeked out, watching in disbelief as the humans continued their charge. Davis, in particular, was like a force of nature. His rifle was blazing, dropping Calirian soldiers with pinpoint accuracy. He moved with such energy, as if the battle was nothing more than a game to him. What the hell is in that coffee? Threx yelled, dropping beside Trosk as energy beams sizzled past their heads. Trosk could only shrug, eyes wide as Davis took down 2 more HAlien soldiers without breaking a sweat. They were halfway to the shield generator now, but the enemy was closing in. The HAliens were advancing, their tall, sleek bodies glinting in the dull light, red eyes glowing with malicious intent. "We're never gonna make it," Threx shouted, panic rising in his voice. "Shut up and keep moving," Trosk yelled back, forcing himself to get up and run again. His legs felt heavy, fear crawling up his spine. But then he saw Davis again, standing on top of a broken turret, firing with wild abandon, laughing like a madman. Something clicked. "Come on," Trosk yelled, adrenaline taking over. He charged forward, his rifle blazing. His squad followed, desperate not to be left behind. Ahead, the humans were already at the front line, smashing through the HAlien defenses with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold. Trosk ducked under a spray of gunfire, his mind racing. The shield generator was just ahead, a towering structure surrounded by mechanical sentries. "We need to get to that thing," the human sergeant yelled, pointing. With his rifle. Yeah, no kidding. Threx snapped back, but he was already moving, dodging and weaving between cover. As they neared the generator, the fire from the HAliens intensified. Energy beams crisscrossed the air, and explosions tore the ground apart. Bodies fell on both sides, but the humans pressed forward. Trosk fired into the fray, his pulse rifle overheating in his hands. The shield generator loomed closer, but so did the enemy. HAlien drones swarmed around it, their mechanical limbs clanking as they fired their weapons. "We'll never get through that!" Threx shouted, pointing at the wall of drones guarding the generator. Davis, still grinning like a maniac, suddenly slammed a fist into Trosk's shoulder. "Don't worry, buddy. We've got this." And with that, he tossed aside his rifle, pulled a knife from his belt, and charged straight at the drones. Trosk blinked, stunned by the audacity. Is he crazy? But it didn't matter. Davis was already tearing through the drones with reckless abandon, his knife flashing as he ripped them apart piece by piece. The rest of the humans followed, guns blazing, knives slashing. The aliens stood frozen for a moment, watching the carnage unfold. "Let's help them," Trosk said, not sure whether he was insane or inspired. With a roar, they charged in after the humans. Trosk found himself shoulder to shoulder with Davis, who was grinning wildly as they slashed and fired their way through the wall of drones guarding the generator. The air crackled with energy blasts. The ground shook beneath their feet, but the humans kept pushing, never slowing down. There was a strange rhythm to their movements, an almost reckless disregard for safety. "You're insane, you know that?" Trosk shouted, his pulse rifle spitting fire at an incoming drone. Davis laughed, ducking under a swinging mechanical arm and jamming his knife into the drone's core. "Just had my coffee, man." Trosk barely had time to register that absurd comment before the next wave of HAliens came crashing down on them. The cold, lifeless eyes of the machines showed no fear, no hesitation. They were programmed to kill, nothing more. But the humans fought like they had something to prove. And somehow that energy bled into Trosk and his squad. They moved faster, fought harder. Threx was beside him now, his alien faces a mask of determined fury as he slashed through. Another drone. Why do we always get dragged into this? Threx panted, firing a quick burst into the glowing red core of an HAlien that had gotten too close. "Because we're still alive," Trosk growled back, ducking under another blast and rolling behind a piece of debris. He raised his rifle and fired a shot that took out an HAlien soldier's head. It fell with a satisfying thud. The shield generator loomed in front of them, its towering structure humming with energy. They were so close. But the HAliens weren't giving up the ground easily. More drones appeared, marching out of the smoke, their guns lighting up the sky. "We need to shut that thing down," the human sergeant shouted from behind cover. "If that generator stays up, we're all toast." Trosk knew he was right. The HAliens' shields were impenetrable as long as the generator was operational. They had to disable it, or this entire mission would be for nothing. "Cover me," Davis yelled, already moving before anyone could respond. Trosk blinked in disbelief as the human barreled forward, dodging between blasts, a grenade in one hand. "He's gonna get himself killed," he shouted, rising to follow. But before he could take more than a few steps, the sky above them exploded in a flash of light. A beam of pure energy shot down from an HAlien aerial platform, carving through the battlefield. The ground buckled, throwing Trask off his feet. He hit the dirt hard, the wind knocked out of him. "Davis!" He coughed, struggling to get back up. To his amazement, Davis was still on his feet, sprinting toward the generator like nothing had happened. The rest of the humans followed suit, throwing themselves into the chaos with reckless abandon. The HAliens were firing everything they had, but it wasn't enough to stop the human advance. Trask scrambled to his feet, his pulse rifle rattling in his grip as he fired at the drones swarming them. "We're not going to make it at this rate." The human sergeant pointed to the top of the generator, shouting over the din of battle. "We don't need to make it, we just need to blow that thing to hell." Trask's squad was pinned down behind cover, the HAlien fire too intense to break through. He glanced up at the generator. It was huge, pulsing with energy that fed directly into the shields protecting the HAlien base. If they could get close enough to plant explosives, they could take it out. But the drones were everywhere, and the window was closing fast, and then, once again, Davis did the unthinkable. Without a word, he vaulted over the debris and sprinted headlong toward the generator, a grenade in each hand. Trask swore under his breath, slamming his back against the cover. "This guy's going to get us all killed," he shouted at Threx. Threx peeked out from behind the cover, his eyes wide. "I don't think he cares. He's already too far gone." The drones zeroed in on Davis, their weapons spitting hot energy. But the human moved like a man possessed, weaving through the fire with unnatural speed. He made it to the base of the generator and threw both grenades with a wild grin. They arced through the air and landed squarely in a nest of cables that fed directly into the generator's core. "Get down!" someone screamed. The explosion rocked the battlefield, a blinding flash of light and fire consuming the generator. The shockwave knocked Trask and the others flat, the air filled with the sound of tearing metal and cracking energy. When Trask finally lifted his head, the generator was a smoldering wreck. The HAlien shields flickered, then collapsed, leaving their base exposed. But there was no time to celebrate. The explosion had drawn the attention of every HAlien on the field. Drones swarmed toward them, their red eyes glowing with mechanical fury. "Now we've done it," Threx muttered, picking himself up. His pulse rifle was overheating, and the ammo was running low. "We're dead, right? This is how we die?" "Not if we get out of here first," Trask replied, yanking him to his feet. "Fall back to the trenches!" the human sergeant shouted, firing his rifle as he moved. "We did what we came for. Let's move before they surround us." Trask nodded, already turning to run, but a hand grabbed his shoulder. He turned to see Davis, breathing hard, but grinning like he had just won the lottery. "Good fight, huh?" the human said, slapping Trask on the back. Trask could only shake his head. "You're insane!" Davis just laughed and started running, waving for the others to follow. "Come on, let's get back and grab another cup of, coffee before round 2. The retreat was chaotic, with drones chasing them every step of the way. The humans led the charge, blasting their way through the remaining HAlien. Trask and his squad followed close behind, trying to keep up. When they finally reached the relative safety of the trenches, the humans collapsed, laughing and shouting like they had just come back from a victory parade. Trask slumped down, breathing heavily, his limbs aching from the fight. He glanced over at Davis, who was already pulling out another pack of coffee grounds from his gear. "You're seriously going to drink more of that stuff?" Davis shrugged. "It's what keeps us going, buddy." Trask stared at the steaming cup for a moment, then sighed. Maybe, just maybe, he'd give it a try next time. The HAlien weren't finished yet, but neither were the humans. Trask had never seen anything like it. The HAlien forces were regrouping for what was clearly a last-ditch effort to wipe them out, but the humans? They were acting like this was just another day on the job. Davis sipped his coffee like he wasn't sitting in a trench on the verge of being overrun by mechanical death machines. "What's the plan?" Threx asked, slumping down beside Trask, his eyes scanning the horizon where the HAlien were forming up again. "We can't hold them off forever." Trask looked over at the human sergeant, who was checking his gear, face calm but focused. "We hit them before they hit us. the sergeant said flatly. Simple as that. Trask blinked. Hit them? They're bringing everything they've got. We just blew up their shield generator. The sergeant gave him a hard look. Exactly. We've rattled them. Now we push. We don't give them time to regroup. Trask exchanged a glance with Threx, who looked like he was trying not to panic. That's insane, Threx muttered. We should be retreating, not... Before he could finish, Davis stood up, his rifle slung over one shoulder, cup of coffee in the other hand. It's not insane. It's how we win. They're machines. They can't handle chaos like we can. He grinned, taking a final gulp of his coffee and tossing the empty cup aside. Besides, I haven't had my daily quota of explosions yet. Traska wasn't sure whether to admire or be terrified of the human mindset, but there wasn't time to argue. The Calirians were advancing, their lines tightening into perfect formation. They would be on top of them in minutes. The humans moved with purpose. Weapons were reloaded, positions taken. Trask and his squad followed suit, checking their rifles, readying grenades. The air was thick with tension. Why do I have a bad feeling about this? Threx muttered, his voice barely audible over the sound of distant marching. Because it's probably a terrible idea, Trask replied, gripping his rifle tighter. But it's the only one we've got. The sergeant raised his hand. Get ready. Trask could hear the mechanical clanking of the Calirian soldiers as they closed in. The sound alone made his skin crawl. There were so many of them. They're red. Eyes glowing like distant stars in the gloom, and then, with a shout, the humans charged. Trask's brain barely had time to process what was happening before his legs moved on their own. His pulse rifle rattled in his grip as he followed the humans into the open battlefield. Explosions rocked the ground and energy blasts filled the air. The Calirians opened fire. Davis was already in the thick of it, laughing like a madman as he tore through the enemy lines, his rifle blazing. Trask fired at a drone that had broken, off from the main formation, taking it down with a well-placed shot. The chaos was overwhelming, but somehow the humans thrived in it. We need to break their formation, the sergeant shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of battle. Trask saw what he meant. The Calirians moved in perfect synchronization, their mechanical bodies shifting like parts of a single machine. If they didn't disrupt that, the humans would be overwhelmed. I'm going for their leader, Davis shouted, pointing to a larger Calirian at the center of the formation. It was taller than the others, its body gleaming with extra armor and weaponry. Clearly the commander. Are you serious? Trask yelled back. That thing will tear you apart. Davis just grinned. Not if I get there first. And then he was off, charging straight for the Calirian commander without a second thought. Trask swore under his breath and followed. Threx was right behind him, muttering curses in their native tongue. The battlefield was pure chaos. Drones swarmed them from all sides, energy blasts cutting through the air. Trask fired wildly, trying to keep up with Davis as he cut a path through the enemy ranks. The closer they got to the commander, the more intense the fire became. Almost there, Davis shouted, dodging a blast that vaporized the ground where he had just been standing. The Calirian commander turned its cold red eyes on them, its weapons powering up with a low hum. It raised its arm, preparing to unleash a devastating attack. Move! Trask shouted, shoving Davis aside just as the blast came down. The ground exploded beneath them, sending both of them flying. Trask hit the dirt hard, his ears ringing. He looked up, dazed, to see the Calirian commander advancing, its massive form blocking out the sky. We're dead, Threx muttered, crawling, over to where Trask had landed, but Davis wasn't done yet. With a groan, he got to his feet, grabbing something from his belt. It was another grenade, this one bigger than the ones he had used before. You know what they say, he called over his shoulder, grinning. Go big or go home. And with that, he charged straight at the commander. Trask watched in disbelief as Davis sprinted toward the towering Calirian, grenade in hand. The commander raised its arm to fire again, but Davis was too fast. He leapt onto the machine, climbing up its armored frame with wild determination. What is he doing? Threx yelled, firing at a nearby drone. Trask didn't answer. He couldn't. tear his eyes away from the spectacle. Davis had reached the commander's head, clinging to the machine like a crazed animal. With a wild laugh, he shoved the grenade into a gap in the armor, then jumped off just as the explosion rocked the battlefield. The commander's head exploded in a shower of sparks and metal, its body crumpling to the ground like a broken toy. For a moment, everything stopped. The HAlien formation faltered, their perfect synchronization shattered. The humans didn't miss a beat. They pressed the advantage, cutting through the disoriented drones. Trask found himself standing over the wreckage of the HAlien commander, breathing hard. The battlefield was littered with the smoking remains of drones, but the humans were still standing, battered but victorious. Davis walked over, covered in dirt and debris, but grinning like he had just won a lottery. "Told you we'd get them," Trask shook his head, still trying to wrap his mind around what had just happened. "You're crazy, completely insane." Davis shrugged. "Maybe. But we won, didn't we?" Trask glanced around at the battlefield. The HAlenians were retreating, their forces broken. Somehow, against all odds, they had done it. As the adrenaline began to wear off, Trask slumped down onto a piece of wreckage, breathing hard. Davis sat down beside him, pulling out another pack of coffee grounds from his gear. Trask stared at him for a moment, then reached out and took the cup. "All right," he muttered. "Let me try this stuff." Davis grinned and handed over the cup. "Welcome to the team, buddy." Trask took a sip and immediately grimaced. It tasted awful. But as he looked out over the battlefield, at the retreating enemy and the victorious humans, he couldn't help but think there might just be something to it after all. The battle was over. For now. And somewhere in the trenches, a new legend about humans and their strange, invincible coffee was just beginning to brew. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts.